The Women's Fund for Scotland is Scotland's only dedicated fund for women and girls. I'm Susan Morrison, and this is our podcast where we talk to inspiring women improving the lives of those women and girls today. We meet Amy, bringing Glasgow Girls a touch of New York swagger. Can you just give us a background, tell us a little bit about the Glasgow Girls Club?
Yeah, so the Girls Club, we're based on a model that I discovered in New York, 2012. I was moving to New York, and I've got family that live there, and I decided I was going to give it a bash. Little did I know that was to be slightly sidelined as I discovered the Girls Club in New York, the Lower East Side Girls Club. I wanted to volunteer, to do something to support. I didn't know it was young women at the time that I wanted to support. I just knew that I wanted to help. It was an orphanage in Nepal originally that I was trying to support through my family, and they introduced me to the Girls Club, and from there, basically one thing led to another, and the founder of the Girls Club and I decided that it would be a good idea to start a girls club in Glasgow and bring the girls from Glasgow to New York. So I thought that in my naivety, I thought, I know, I'll just like find all the girls through all the youth clubs in Glasgow that would want to come, and I'll work with the youth clubs, and then I'll just set up trips and I'll stay in New York. But that's quickly became not the thing that I did. So I basically spent a couple of years coming back and forth to figure out what a girls club like that would look like in Glasgow, because it's probably good to say that the Lower East Side Girls Club is just this formidable organisation. At the point when I discovered them, they had a 20,000 square foot building with 3 floors for women, for girls and young women. 10 floors of social housing had also been incorporated into the build that they'd just done. They were a grassroots organisation and really had just built this up over like the 20 years previous. They were set up to just give that extra bit of help for young women, expose them to, all the great things that are available to them in the world that they potentially might not have been able to sort of have the experiences of. So we based it on that. 10 years later, almost. In fact, over 10 years. By the time I said it was 2014, by the time I incorporated it. We are now, we're a CIC, we're a social enterprise. We've done 2 trips to New York. We have partnered with the police, with local government, local council, and education as well. We're doing a little bit of stuff in the schools and in partnership with community police and campus police. And we've really honed in on girls at risk of crisis. So that's our sort of place that because we're small. We sort of started off. I had a full-time job for the first 6 years as we set it up in Glasgow. So it's only been the last 2 or 3 years that I've actually been able to do, ironically during the pandemic, I've been able to sort of dedicate my time to it. So I've went full-time over the last few years, and we've just been motoring away, really sort of we're all about building relationships and building collaborations and spotlighting other organisations. So that sort of first piece that I was trying to do, which was find those organisations that were doing good work, help them to connect with the work of the Girls Club in New York. We've sort of stayed true to that. Like we really thrive on partnerships. So we're really excited.
What a terrifying concept. Bringing Glasgow girls together with Lower East Side New York girls. I mean, I can see the world quail in the face of that mighty army of young women.
Totally. And it's funny you say that, because that actually was that was my big driver when I was meeting the girls in the Lower East Side, and there was these fierce warrior young women. They were like, "Oh my God, I love your accent. Can we come to Glasgow? Like we really." And I'm like, "Oh my God." They were like, "We really love Scotland." And it's like, for me, I came from Kilmarnock as well, and I could just imagine my little 15-year-old self thinking, to know that there was a girl in New York or in Lower East Side, this like cool, like kick-ass, like young woman that thought that my accent was cool, would have blown my mind. It would really
yeah.
So, and I just thought, I've got to like make this happen, bring these girls together. And when they did, they spent a couple of weeks together, and they went to camp in the Adirondacks. We did it twice. And it was explosive, you know, it was like a meeting of minds. Like they just had such a
It must have been,
time.
imagine being in the middle of that. It'd be like standing in the middle of a nuclear reactor. Why young girls in crisis? I mean, and why young women in crisis? Why did you hone in on that?
We started off working in partnership with other organisations. So youth clubs was one of them. We worked with Royston Youth Action, who are an amazing organisation in the East End of Glasgow, just doing brilliant stuff with families and with young people in the community. And we did some brilliant stuff with them. We went together to New York with Royston Youth Action the first time, but the next time we went to New York, we worked with an organisation called Why People. They have an arm of what they do is supporting young people who are affected by homelessness. So we actually worked with them on a couple of films as well. And the impact that we found we had when we worked with that group, particularly with one particular young woman, we found that we started to become a connector for her. So we actually, by default, we ended up introducing her to opportunities and pieces of our networks that actually helped to really transform the direction of her life. She ended up going on to college and doing really fun, amazing, creative stuff. Wants to be involved in TV and film. So the stuff that we'd done with her just felt like it was really relevant and really, really helpful, and helped her to sort of build that confidence to be able to just pick up her life again and with gusto. So what we recognised during that period, because we were volunteer led, we were working on a really small sort of scale. So we had one of our board members was the Health and Social Care Partnership consultant. He really understood the landscape of at-risk people, at-risk young people, and that sort of space between being at risk of crisis and coming out of crisis. So that actually those two spaces were the spaces that you could have a huge impact. Because when people are in crisis, it's difficult to sort of, you know, navigate that. And there's a lot of services doing brilliant work to do that. So what we recognised was that actually where our strong point was at either side of that. So when the risk, which is where we worked with that young woman, she was at risk, she was living in a supported accommodation setting, her life was in chaos. She went into crisis. We were there for her when she came out of the crisis. And through all of that, you know, we got that sort of feedback at the very end to say thank you for sticking with us, and that and it was kind of unconscious in our, from my perspective, but it was our Health and Social Care Partnership board member that said, user community connectors, like this work that you can do within these spaces of crisis, at risk or coming out, you know, really is an important space. And, you know, let's sort of get into that sort of space to see where we can actually put a bit more structure around how we apply for funding as well. Because at that point we were just hear 'em, scare 'em. We didn't apply for any statutory or any sort of grant funding. Women's Fund were actually the first that we applied for.
And what did the grant money allow you to do?
We applied for a fund to help us to build a digital resource that could signpost girls and young women in Glasgow. So it's Glasgow focused just now to resources, but really looking at how we support girls and young women and how we also support those that support girls and young women. So for example, the youth clubs, carers, so people that are kinship carers, families, parents, so that they can get access to resources that are available for young women. Things like toolkits, training kits, sort of training services, youth clubs, so that we're really doing that deep dive to map out what exactly is available for young women. So we really want to make sure that we can do that kind of forensic deep dive into the landscape in Glasgow and spotlight these organisations that have got that focus on young women. So in the app, what we're doing is tagging it and filtering it through the training and through the toolkit, so that you can actually like sort of zone in and see exactly what you want to see.
That is, to use a Glasgow phrase, pure dead brilliant, isn't it? Because there is a lot of help out there and stuff out there, but it's finding it sometimes, or the array can be bewildering. So this idea that you're talking about tailoring it as well, it's absolutely that's fantastic, Amy. And does it help you to know that, like, the Women's Fund for Scotland has a great network of connections as well that you can zap into, and that can help you too?
Yeah, I mean, that's like, it's funny because it's like the technology is like just as technology is, isn't it? It's a mirror of what we're actually doing in real life, IRL. Yeah. Like, you know, that network that exists in Scotland through networks like the Women's Fund, all of those networks of women, and the support that the Women's Fund can give through the sort of financial side of stuff is you know, it really is just the lifeblood, and the fact that that is existing in Scotland right now. And I think when we first started in 2012 and the Women's Fund were existing then as well, a lot of people would say, you know, why would you have a girls' club? What about the boys? Like, you know, we're like, well, that's great. And you know, and it's great because now there's loads of stuff for boys as well. Well, there's not enough for boys, to be fair. There's a lot of stuff for men. There's a big focus now on men's mental health, which is great. But back then, you know, and even now, I was at a Women's Legacy event yesterday, and the conversation around the inequality that still exists for women and young women, the lack of support, all of that stuff, you know, it's so real. And, you know, it almost feels like, you know, there only being the Women's Fund is just incredible, because there should be much more, I think.
Apparently, only 1.8% of funding goes to women's groups for charitable funding, which is like, what? One of the things that struck me in one of the films that you did, what was the phrase that you were using? Pure dead love yourself. Pure love yourself. That's an insult in a way, innit? Oh, you pure love yourself, so you do. But you turned it on its head in a way, didn't you? You went to New York and you taught it, and they were going, and Americans, I love that Americans went, well, of course you should love yourself. Is that the sort of thing that you're teaching young women? Love yourself?
Yeah. I think like that kind of self-worth is at the heart of everything. I mean, really, isn't it? Like, if you don't, and I think that thing of like, if you don't love yourself, you can't love anybody else. I don't like, there's a whole kind of thinking around that, isn't there? But I don't know if that's too accurate. But that was one of the things in New York. They were just so good at like calling out their strengths, you know, and shining a light on and how great they were. And sometimes, you know, and I don't mean this of the Girls Club, but some people in New York are really good at like selling themselves when actually kind of not like as good as they think or they say. You know, they're really good at marketing themselves. We just don't have that in Scotland. We don't have a lot of that. We're not very good at doing that.
I thought it was brilliant. I mean, that you were actually encouraging young women to look upon themselves favourably, not constantly judging themselves and others. And there was also one of the interviews, and you had the little thing underneath that said who they were, and it was almost like a job title. And I thought, I've never thought of it this way before, but it kind of sums it. And it said underneath, Big Sister. And I thought, if women could be better big sisters to our young sisters, is that what the Glasgow Girls Club would like to see?
Yeah. And the feeling really that we try to impart with the girls is that we are like their big sisters. Essentially, we're mapping it into education. We're mapping it into kind of expectations and outcomes of curriculum. We're working in partnership with the schools to look at how do we bring girls back into schools that are maybe not going as much, especially since the pandemic. You know, so we are very much based and grounded in that sort of, you know, almost classroom kind of focus, but really the kind of ethos and the feeling that we've got is really that network. And going back to the Women's Fund and the network of the women, that looking at the girls that are coming through that are 15, 16, 17, 18, that we want them to then become part of the women's network and the women's sort of you know, groups that we work with. Because one of my main colleagues just now is actually a former member, so she's 23 now, and she started out with the Girls Club, and now she's like, you know, finishing a law and social policy degree. And so that for us, if we could just have an army of girls that come through and end up working for the Girls Club, that would be my dream. Like, you know, find out what their dream is, and then and show them how to build their work in the Girls Club around that, which is kind of what the Girls Club in New York do as well. All the different departments they have. It's like, what's your passion? Oh, I love, you know, art, or I love, okay, like, let's get you like hooked in to become like an arts facilitator with the Girls Club, or let's get, or, you know, Sophie loves reports, and, you know, it's like, okay, like, come on, like, help us do the research for this app.
Oh, Amy, looking at the Girls Club online and talking to you, it's made me want to be, I'm too old to be a big sister, but I can be a mad great auntie.
No one's ever too old to be a big sister.
Thanks, Amy.
Thanks, Susan.
Thank you for joining us and listening to this story. I hope you've been inspired. And if you would like to support the Women's Fund for Scotland, search for us online and listen out for our other podcast episodes.